Hello my friends! Today we are going to do the last but one part of our color along of the Fairy House in World of Flower by Johanna BASFORD. We'll make the background together and we'll use Derwent Inktense because I want very deep colors and the Derwent Inktense are perfect for that. In Johanna BASFORD's book, the paper is thick enough to work with Derwent Inktense. But we must be careful not to use too much water and always protect the next page with a white sheet. Here is the color palette that I'll use for the background. Around my little white halo that I made in ivory colors, that you do not see very well on the screen, but that you will see on your sheet because I see them very well on mine. So around this small white halo, I will apply teal green, iris blue, bright blue, deep blue, and at the end, black ink. And we start immediately with the teal green. I apply it around my little ivory circles. The pencil strokes on the sheet will be attenuated by the water. But anyway, we can't use too much water on the paper, so I try not to make pencil lines. So it will allow you to add fewer layers of water and to have something homogeneous. If you work with a pencil not well sharpened, it helps you not to make lines when you color on the sheet. I don't sharpen the pencil, I use the flat side of the lid to do my coloring. For the part with bright blue, I haven't filmed everything. I don't think it's complicated. Just create a third halo. After the teal green and the iris blue, you add the bright blue in a slightly larger halo. And now I make all the remaining areas with deep blue. Don't hesitate to press well with your pencil, because it's a very beautiful color in its deep shades. If you don't press enough, it will probably be more blend. As he will work in the small corners, I have sharpened my pencil. If I have small crumbs of pencil, I remove them with my makeup brush. I go back a little over the bright blue to mix the pigments of the two blues. It will give a nicer gradient. The same for the other blues. I won't film the entire coloring because it really doesn't present any difficulty. I fill with the deep blue all the areas that I left in white. On the edges of the page, I'll leave a blank area where I'll apply black. Here I went too far with the deep blue, so I'm going to remove the pigments of my deep blue with the electric eraser. And I add a little iris blue over it. Small mistakes like that are okay as long as you know how to fix them. I'm finished with the deep blue. As you can see, I have applied it everywhere. The day is becoming too dark to continue filming, so I'll cut the video now and I'll make a connection with the one that I will shoot tomorrow. I'm back. We have a beautiful sunny day today. I hope the light will be a little more constant than what I had the last few days. It will be more comfortable for you. So now I'm going to finish my background and add black to the places where I want it to be darker. so mainly in the corners and on the edges. And I can blend it a little bit in blue to have a nice blue. Don't hesitate to use a strong pressure where you want it to be completely black, because if you want it to be black, you have to add black. If you don't add enough pigments, you will have a gray. On the other hand, where I blend black in the blue, I don't press hard. Otherwise, the black pigments will completely cover my blue pigments, and I will therefore no longer have a good transition between my two colors. In this whole area here, I don't add black, because it is lightened by the halos of light. I'm going to add black here below, so that we can well see the light that comes out of the house with the reflections on the floor. I fade the black upwards. And afterwards, I will darken the areas below the plants to make shadows. That will make them pop out even more, especially as I add lots of light colors on the plants on purpose to make them appear bright at night. We're finished with the black, so now we are going to apply the water. It's the moment of truth. To apply water, I use Derwent water brush size 2 and 1. As the number is erased on the brush 2, I add a piece of balloon on the end so that I easily recognize the thick brush and the thin one. When I no longer have enough water on my brush, rather than pressing it, which may cause too much water to come at once, I use a small water tank to moisten my brush. I use a paper towel to wipe off excess water. If I want a little more water but without losing the pigment color, I add a few drops of water here in a small pot Like that, if I just need a little bit of water, but I don't want to rinse the tip of my brush, I have what I need in my little pot. Let's get started. With Derwent Inktense on large surface, you easily make traces. So if you add, for example, too much water and then you stop, you will have a wet trace that will remain fixed on your coloring. We can blur it later with other techniques, but the ideal is to try to have as little as possible. So I will work by areas. I will do small areas at a time. For example, here you see that I can consider that it is only one zone. So I will do all this zone there. I will start with the small zones and then the larger zones. I stop at a place where the interstice is quite thin. So if there is ever a trace when my water dries, it will not be too strong. I start with my finest brush. I take a little more water to be sure, and I come here to start in the little corner. We always go from the light color to the dark color. If you don't, you'll bring dark pigments in the light colors. And the ideal not to have a line is that there is not too much water at the junction. It's really a precise job that we have to do here because it's very small gaps between the patterns. But I love it. I find it super relaxing to wet the Derwent Inktense, especially when you see the magnificent colors that reveal themselves as soon as you apply water. I love doing that. Before beginning a light area, I rinse my brush very well in the water to be sure not to bring dark pigments in my bright area. For a nice transition, I go back a few times after wiping my brush. I take a bigger brush for this area. I want a nice gradient, and that will be easier with a bigger brush. I use the size 2. Here I wipe the junction a little like that to make a soft transition. I see that my green is not strong enough, so I simply take the pencil and I add a little bit of teal green. So for the edge, I use a flat brush. I will remoisten it regularly in my little bucket of water here. Oh, wait 2 minutes, because there is my little plume here who comes to say hello. It's okay, we can start again. Here, with my flat brush that I dip here in a small bucket of water, I can have a uniform edge without much effort. There are cat hairs on my coloring page. How is it possible? Plume, what are you doing with my coloring? And now I'm going to make the final touches with my water brush. Here I overflow a little on my coloring with my Derwent Inktense, so I rinse my brush well and I go back in with a very clean and almost dry brush. It will sponge your pigments and therefore we won't see them anymore. Of course, you must do it directly as long as the pigments are still wet. Once they are dry, they are fixed. You can see here it's convenient to have a small pot with lightly tinted water when you want to make finishes. If you use a clean brush, it will make a white spot. And here, as I have water where there are already blue pigments, I can use this water to make my finishes. I check the back. The page buckles, but it doesn't pierce. We have to be careful not to add too much water. But as long as you don't apply several layers of water, the paper in Johanna BASFORD's book handle water well. I wouldn't go as far as doing watercolor in it, we shouldn't exaggerate, but Derwent Inktense or Neocolor can work. So here I have too much water on my brush. Even if I sponge it, it flows too much. And that's because I'm hot, so the air inside the brush pushes the water outside. So in this case, I show you what I do. I open the brush, you see that there is a big water bubble here, which is pushed out. I sponge it, I press lightly on it before closing it. It will solve my pressure problem inside the brush. This is a little tip that I found. There are surely other ways to do it, but here is what I do. In general, it's okay with that. As the goal of my channel is to share my coloring tips, well, here I'm giving you this one. If you have another one, I listen to you. I'm interested that you share it with us in the comments. Well, I think you understand the principle, so I'll continue off camera the rest of the page and I'll come back directly after to tell you about how I'm going to homogenize the different layers of Derwent Inktense. I think it's okay about homogeneity, but I always like to work again on the page. And I will rework this guy and give you my little tips to erase your brush strokes. And there is the result after we have added water on our Derwent Inktense. There are some areas that are a little uneven, you see here, there. Overall, it's not really annoying, I think. Here is the line a little bit too straight. Maybe even I can still correct it if it's not completely dry. I go back with my very clean brush to try to remove pigments. But no, they don't really go away because my coloring is already relatively dry. Now I'm going to let it dry completely. The ink is already dry, but it's important to wait until your paper is completely dry too. Otherwise, you really risk damaging your book. So here you see that on the back it did not pierce. The page buckles a little bit, but you don't have to worry. I'm sure you have books or comics at home. Just put the book flat on a desk or on the floor. You put 30 comics on top of that. It makes an improvised press. You leave it overnight and the next day your page practically doesn't buckle anymore. Now I'm going to rework certain areas with pencil or with soft pastel. I'll add a little bit of yellow in the area of light here because it's too white and the effect doesn't suit me. And also here in the light balls, I think I'm going to add a little bit of yellow in the middle and rework the transitions here so that the sky becomes pretty. And in the last step, we'll add some Posca to make the stars and to accentuate certain patterns. Now I have something to fix that I just looked at when looking at the photo of my coloring. It's that the clear area here is wrong. It's wrong because the night is at the back of the house and the light that comes from the house cannot illuminate the back of the house. We see the reflection here on this little flower which is on the side, but it cannot make a halo at the back. So I'm going to fix it by adding some deep blue. I do this on both sides. I take my brush and I am coming to moisten it all. Here I overflowed on the edge of the mushroom. I take my wet brush and very clean brush. I pass it a first time over the stem. I dip it again to rinse it. I wipe it and I pass it 2 or 3 times dry, after having wiped it on my small paper towel. And it's okay, we no longer see the small stain. I take the color all the way down to have an area as uniform as possible. And I do the same on the other side. Here we are. Now we have a very dry page, so we can rework the background so that it's more homogeneous. To rework the background, there are 2 techniques. The first is to use a soft pastel. I'll always use the Faber Castell. And the second technique is to use Prismacolor. Here are the color palette of Prismacolor, which fits well with the shades that we used. Soft pastels are easier for large areas. It goes much faster. As I explained to you in part 1, I numbered the column from 1 to 6 and the lines from 1 to 12. And in the small booklet we have all these colors exactly in order. And so for example, here, if I take the soft pastel number 3, it's the column 3 and the line 3, and I look in the booklet and I see that this color is named Indentrine Blue in Faber Castell. So the 3 colors that I use to smooth my night sky background are these 3 colors. These 2 are pretty vibrant blue, and this one is rather an indigo blue, which draws a little more toward grey. It depends on the effect that you are looking for on your page. If you want a sky with very vibrant color, then you rather take these 2 colors there. If you want a sky with more natural colors, then you take this color here. I'm going to mix the 3 colors. I will start with soft pastel because it's easier, and then I'm going to rework the small details with Prismacolor. So you take a small cotton bud. I start with this color here, the cobalt blue, the number 5, and I apply it directly on my Derwent Inktense. I think that my light blue halo is wrong. I think that the green halo is enough, and therefore I cover the halo a little bit. The color is lighter around the green halo. so we still have a nice transition, a nice gradient. If you have the same box as me, you can easily follow what I do by following the number. I use 3, 3 here, it's the column 3, the line 3. And here I use the 3, 5, column 3, line 5. I decided to write numbers on the pastel box because I was tired of counting all the time when I had to go below. I was there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay, that's the number 7. And finally, once I wrote the numbers in the margin with white Posca, everything became much easier. As the paper has been wet, it's a little rough, and in fact it's perfect to apply the soft pastel because it hangs really well on it. In the comments of the French video, part 1, we have Jocelyn who asked me if we had to use fixative with soft pastels. In the part 1, we used soft pastels on the front of the house before applying the pencil. So if you add pencil after the pastels on the same area, the pencil will be enough to fix the soft pastels. But here on the background, we use soft pastel as a last layer, so you absolutely need to use a fixative to avoid transfer of pastel on the page in front of your coloring page. Personally, I always use a fixative when I color a page, even with pencil, because I don't want that the time damage my coloring and the colors are fading in the time. So I always use a fixative on my coloring pages. And that's it with the pastels. You really erase all the little imperfections that you may have done with your water brush. On the darkest part, I turn my cotton over and I apply the number 33, that is Indentrine blue. I think you understand the principle. I'm going to film the top part and then I'll stop recording to finish the bottom part. Otherwise, I would never have enough space on my memory card to record all these videos. I'm not going to use the Prismacolor now. I think I will reserve them for the small corners. I will probably use them for the center of the balls to blend the green in the blue better. I will show it to you as soon as I finish to add pastel everywhere. Be careful with the pastel, it does not hold, so don't put your hand like that on the coloring, otherwise you will have a lot of blue color here which will transfer to the patterns. If you need to put your hand on the paper, protect the paper with a sheet of paper. So here you see I add a white sheet of paper on my page, so I can protect it and I can let my hand down on the paper to have more precise movements. Here on the side we have a wider area, so I'm winning time by taking a cotton pad. I have a small box to drop my stuff when I'm not using them, because it's full of stands of pastel, so if you put stands like that on your office, it will necessarily transfer on your hand or on your coloring page. It's done! We have a smooth background thanks to our soft pastel. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going back in with the white Prismacolor to blur the edges here of the circles as well as the outside, so that it blends well like a bright halo and that there is no clear line. I regularly rinse my pencil on a white sheet of paper so I don't bring blue pigments where I want white. With my white Prismacolor, I create a halo around my light with a much more blurred border, which gives a more natural effect, and also it allows me to rework the wand shape, since between my Derwent Inktense pencils and my water brush and then the soft pastels, I lost the wand shape of each wand of light a little bit. Now I use the light yellow glaze in Polychromos Faber Castell, and I add a little bit, but really without pressing too much, mainly in the center and less toward the outside. So I make a small wand with some pressure in the center, middle pressure, and then I go outward with much less pressure. Regularly, I clean the lid of my pencil on my sheet. Here we have done the background of this page of World of Flowers. The page buckles a little, but to flatten it, as I told you, you leave it a whole night under a stack of comics, and the next day you'll see that it will be almost flat. We still have some small adjustments to make on the page. You'll find them in part 5, the final touch, the details that change everything. Until then, I'll show you what my kittens are doing in my office when they're not lying on my coloring page. Get well and take care of yourself and your loved ones. And see you soon in my next videos. Happy colorings!